Welcome to The Independent Workforce, the podcast where we explore the now and the future of work through the lens of temporary employment, such as freelancers, contractors, fractional experts, you name it. Here we speak with CEOs, recruiters, founders, and industry leaders about how they work with independent talent, the wins, the challenges, and the lessons learned. My name is Yurii. I'm growing the freelance market at Freelancer Map, an international platform that's been connecting top independent professionals with companies for over 20 years. And my guest is Viki Dowthwaite, a group commercial director at Trinnovo Group, who leads commercial strategy across the UK, Ireland, and DACH region, helping organizations combine contract, consultancy, and embedded hiring to stay competitive in an increasingly complex and regulated talent landscape. And of course, shapes how companies build modern workforces. So, welcome, Viki.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Yurii.
Super happy to talk to you. It's been some time, but here we are, and I can't wait to ask you all those questions. Because why? We need to move this industry forward. Independent talents are so amazing, and you are in the middle, in the eye of the storm, and you are working with these people, amazing humans. So tell me a little about your company and what's your involvement with freelancers.
Yeah, of course. So Trinnovo Group is what I'd refer to as a multi-brand kind of talent and workforce solutions business. And we operate across technology, advanced technology and regulation. So in terms of kind of what those workforce solutions are, we support clients across kind of permanent hiring, executive search, contract and freelance delivery, full project and statement of work delivery, and then kind of employer of record and payroll solutions, kind of particularly when companies are hiring internationally. And we deliver all of those solutions via kind of a variety of different brands. We have three kind of core recruitment brands, Trust and Soda, which is our kind of tech and engineering arm. Deep Rec, which is our advanced tech arm, so that's all things kind of artificial intelligence, and then Broadgate, which is focused more across kind of the regulatory world, so governance, risk and compliance. And then alongside those three recruitment brands, we have built out Trinnovo Consulting, which is where a lot of our kind of milestone and outcome-based project work sits. So we deliver all of those solutions via those four different brands. And as you mentioned, we operate across the UK, Ireland, the DACH region, but also America. And one of the things that's, I think, quite important in our world, particularly when it comes to freelance, is that compliance element. So we're able to operate through kind of our own SECO licensed entity in Switzerland, AUG licensed entity in Germany. But freelancers are a really big part of how we deliver, whether that is individual specialists, full project teams, or more structured kind of co-sourcing models. And under my role as commercial director, I've got lucky enough to have an overarching view of all of our reoccurring solutions, which includes kind of our day rate contracts and projects.
Why freelancers are a big part of what you're working on? I'm asking because many companies are using freelancers and independent talent like a small part in addition to permanent or executive search. So I'm curious, why do you also pay attention to freelancers?
I think freelancers are incredibly important because they enable a company to be a lot more agile. In the world that we work and that we live in now, information flows so much more freely. And it's important that a company is utilizing that information and is able to kind of pivot and, like I say, work in a much more agile fashion. So to me, that's what freelancers enable you to do.
Yeah, I feel like that's exactly what many businesses are missing. And talking about the other side, so what kind of clients do you typically work with?
So it's quite a broad mix, but there are definitely kind of a few key segments. So if you think at kind of one end, where we work with startups. So to me, this is where freelancers are often critical because they move really quickly, but they're not able to sometimes commit to that permanent headcount too early. After kind of startup, I'd then say you've kind of got the scale up world, which is probably where we're seeing the highest demand because companies are growing really quickly, but their priorities are consistently shifting and freelancers give them this flexibility to scale up and scale down without slowing the business down. And then at the other end of the scale, you've got kind of your enterprise customers. So I think particularly in regulated environments like financial services, where we see freelancers used much more strategically. So to us, that's things like supporting large transformation programs, regulatory change, or bringing in niche skill sets where they don't exist internally. And then I say finally, what the last area for us, which is a newer area, I say over the last kind of few years, is across kind of private equity and venture capital backed businesses. And to me in that space, it is all about speed and value creation. So we support kind of portfolio companies post investment, helping them kind of build out teams quickly, deliver on these transformation brands, and hit those growth milestones that they promised their investors. So I think freelancers play a huge role there because, again, they allow businesses to move fast, access that specific expertise, and avoid overhiring kind of before they're ready.
I feel like it would be amazing if every business wanted to be fast and bring more value to their investors. Because, from startups, scale ups, and private equity, I kind of understand this. You want to create things fast, and sometimes you don't have all the money in the world to pay all the money in the world to your full time experts. That's why you hire freelancers. But if we are talking about enterprises, why do you think they are not that agile?
I think they probably think they're being agile, but there is just a lot more kind of red tape and loopholes, unfortunately, that you have to jump through in those type of environments. When we work with startups, scale-ups, kind of portfolio companies, we're often able to kind of be onboarded within their kind of procurement teams within a very short space of time, kind of a week, 2 weeks in some instances. Whereas I'm working with an enterprise customer at the moment where we began onboarding at the end of September. So if
Okay.
you think we're now coming into our 6 month worth of onboarding, whereas the companies we were helping in that scale-up world would have completed the project by now, we haven't even kicked it off yet. So it's just the red tape and the loopholes. But I appreciate that with larger companies, they're a lot more cautious, shall we say.
I still don't get it why companies do not want to hire fast and get results. But okay, it's totally another conversation, and we can talk about it forever. And let's turn a little bit more into the market, so into the independent workforce market. So I'm curious, you are here a lot of time, and you know how it works. You are in the middle of this. Let's say call it future of work and talent revolution. So I'm curious, from your perspective, how has the independent workforce market evolved in the past few years? And maybe what will happen in the near future?
It shifted a lot. I think I've been working within kind of freelancing and contract recruitment now for maybe 16 years, which makes me feel really old. But to me, it shifted from being kind of more reactive into being kind of genuinely strategic. So I think it used to have been previously that a freelancer was typically brought in just to plug a gap. Someone's left, a project needs an extra pair of hands, and you just bring someone in short term to do that for them. But I think businesses are now becoming a lot more deliberate about how they structure their workforce. So they're blending kind of your permanent employees, your freelancers, your projects and your consultancy teams. But crucially, I think every single area is being kind of used for a different outcome. So for me anyway, I think that those permanent hires are still really important because they're there about building that long-term capability, they're building culture, they're building ownership internally. And then the freelancers are coming in, like say, for that speed, the niche expertise and delivery on maybe on a specific outcome. But then you also can't just rely on permanent and freelancers. You're going to need those project teams where there's a need for end-to-end delivery or transformation at scale. And as I mentioned, I think that this shift for me has really been driven largely by the pace of change in technology. I think businesses can't afford to wait 3 to 6 months to hire permanently when priorities are moving so quickly. By the time they've gone to market, they've scoped a role, they've interviewed, they've onboarded, the requirement and the tech has sometimes changed. So use freelancers to get started immediately, to build and test that capability, to deliver those key milestones, and then you can decide, okay, this needs to be built internally longer term. And then this is where we can see kind of more formalized kind of contractor strategies and the greater adoption of co-sourcing models. But so to me, the independent workforce isn't just growing, but it's becoming quite an important part of how businesses operate, but more importantly, how they stay competitive.
No, it's interesting because at Freelancer Map we have the things that we allow people to test how it works, to like post a project and see. And recently I just had an answer from a potential client that, hey, we don't have budget till June. Let's continue the conversation in June. I'm like, I'm not even asking you about a budget. Like, let's start right now. You have XML feed. Just put it out there. Like it will be super easy. By June, you will have already results. Why do you wait? But to a point, it feels like companies are ready to wait. I don't know why, but who knows? And I really loved how you phrase it, that coming from this reactive approach, like filling the gap, into more of the strategic. And I feel like that's exactly what is missing. And also coming back a little bit, one of the previous guests, Rich Wilson, he told about this 40-40-20 approach, like 40% full-time, 40% independent talent, and 20% AI. And I'm curious, from your perspective, from your experience, why should company accept for being fast? Why should company move to this blended workforce?
It's about staying competitive, right? If all of the other companies in your market are adopting AI, are adopting freelancers, and are accelerating the rate of change in their organization quicker, and you don't do that, you will very, very quickly fall behind. There's so many good examples. I was actually researching these the other day because I'm doing a talk for the Bayes Business School shortly at their London symposium, and there's some brilliant examples where, for instance, Kodak. And they had a team of engineers that actually developed the digital camera years before it came to market. But Kodak shut it down because they wanted to keep the margins of the film really high. So they shut down that innovation, focused on what was already working rather than changing. And when we saw what happened with film cameras. Is the same with Nokia. Nokia actually developed the touch screen years before iPhone, but buried it, didn't bring it to market. And then we've seen what's happened with Nokia's telecoms. So unless you want to be a Kodak or a Nokia in that instance, you have to adapt.
It's amazing example, like I will definitely quote you. And when I will talk to clients, I will tell, do you want to be like Kodak or Nokia, or do you want to be like an Apple or something like that? And
Let's face it, like Nokia and Kodak aren't doing too badly still, but what they could be doing, like I say, that's probably the kicker.
yeah, yeah. And I also hear a lot about this talent shortage on the market. And I hear that experienced professionals are moving from full-time jobs to being like independent talent, to being independent experts, consultants, etc. Is it something that is really happening? Do you also see this talent shortage?
It's easy just to look at the unemployment stats and assume. So I think the UK were around kind of 5%, Germany similar. It's easy to assume there's a lot of available talent, but in our markets that we focus on, like tech, AI, data, cybersecurity, it's just not the reality. And I think the shortage is the reality, particularly at the experienced end of the market. Now, for me, there's a few reasons for that. The first one, again, is that pace of technological change. New skill sets are emerging faster than people can realistically train into them. And that in turn leads to kind of a lack of new entrants. I don't want to be negative, but you've seen like the rising cost of education. I think in the UK now, to kind of get your degree, you're probably looking at around kind of 60 to 90,000 pounds to go through kind of a 3-4 year course. So people are looking at kind of alternative career paths, and there's this barrier to entry in some fields, which means we're just not seeing enough people to come through. So I think when you combine that, this pace of technological change, this lack of new entrants, and then if you look at all this experience, it just takes time. You can't fast track someone into being a really strong AI deployment engineer or transformation lead overnight. So what you end up with is this really competitive market for that top tier of talent. But to me, that's where these freelancers sit, because they've built that experience across multiple environments. And that links again to how businesses hire. The priorities inside business needs to constantly shift, and what they need today will look different to what they need in 3 years' time. And that's where that traditional hiring model again starts to struggle.
It's interesting because, for example, when you buy some piece of technique, for example, when you buy a phone or a microwave or whatever, you don't actually read an instruction. You always click, 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 and see how it works. And for some reason, before trying to work with independent talent, with freelancers, with contractors, people need an instruction. It's so weird. I have no idea how it works. And also, especially, coming to the education part, I feel like that currently you can educate yourself. Okay, ChatGPT ChatGPT is very flattering and don't trust everything it says to you. Still, if you are smart enough, you can analyze information. You can go ask like people to help you. People love to be mentors. You just have to reach out and ask them about it. And then once again, coming back to AI, it's like everywhere. It's developing, like
It is.
5 years ago. Okay, no 5 years. Who am I kidding? 2 years ago, I wouldn't imagine doing things I'm doing right now with AI. And now it's like, I don't know what will be tomorrow. And I'm curious from your perspective, how Gen AI impacting hiring side? Are there any changes coming in the workforce because of Gen AI?
So many, so many. I think even internally, kind of at Trinnovo Group, we've actually ended up hiring our own kind of AI and automation lead internally. And this guy to me is an absolute wizard. He has made my life 10 times easier than I could imagine it being. But to me, it's having a really big impact, but it's not that AI is replacing everybody in the way that kind of gets spoken about. To me, it's much more around kind of like the evolution than the replacement. So if we take kind of software engineers, for example, engineers now need to not just be really good at coding, they need to work with kind of AI tools effectively, think more in terms of kind of systems and outcomes. And in a lot of cases, to me, they're moving almost closer to kind of the product way of thinking. So it's less about like just writing the code and more about designing solutions, like orchestrating these different tools and models and understanding what they've actually built, how that delivers value to the business. And so the bar's just shifting. So at the same time AI is automating parts of the role, that's where companies rethink the structure of their teams. So link it again back to kind of this independent workforce. Because businesses don't know exactly what they need long term, because of the rate of this AI change, freelancers should be brought in to bring in this really specific AI expertise to build on initial products or capabilities, test what works. And to me, GenAI is actually accelerating the use of flexible talent because, like I say, it deals with that uncertainty, and freelancers can help businesses kind of move through that uncertainty faster.
I speak to different people. Some people are full-time experts, some people are freelancers. And what I see from my personal experience, I won't talk about everyone, but what I see that people who are hired full-time, they do not have time to play with AI. They are so busy with
That's
their
so
workload.
dangerous. That is such a dangerous mindset, though, to say I'm too
Yeah.
busy to learn AI. I just don't think it's something that's optional anymore. I really don't.
This episode of The Independent Workforce is brought to you by Freelancer Map, the home of freelancing. Whether you are looking to hire top freelance talent fast or a freelancer ready to find your next big project, Freelancer Map connects the right people with the right work. No endless job boards, no guesswork, just direct access to verified experts and opportunities across the globe. Visit freelancermap.com and start building your next success story today. But it still happens. No
Yes.
matter, I totally get it. And to the point that freelancers, no matter how busy they are still playing with AI because they understand that it's happening. No matter how hard you try to avoid it, it's here. So you either win it or lose. Like it's your choice. And I feel like freelancers, they're on the edge of technology. They're always testing new tools. They're always trying new things. And that's exactly the benefit of like hiring them. And once again, you will never replace a full-time expert with a freelancer, with a contractor, but you can take them to fasten things up, to make it, to make it better. And, coming back to like freelance stuff, like working with freelancers, hiring freelancers, I'm curious if you have a client who come to you and say, hey, we need someone to deal with this project. How do you usually find and select freelancers for this client?
So it's probably a little bit of a mix. And I think it has to be because unfortunately for us as recruiters, the best freelancers aren't all sitting on one platform. It would be a lot easier if you guys were, if everybody was just on Freelancer Map or LinkedIn. And of course, platforms like that are a really big part of it. But I think if that's all that you rely on, you're really accessing just the visible part of the market. So at Trinnovo Group, we try to go a bit deeper. So we use platforms like GitHub to see what people are actually building. We use Google Scholar, particularly with an AI, to find people working right at the cutting edge. But I think for us, the biggest differentiator is our communities. We've spent the last kind of 10 years or so investing really heavily in building these global networks. We have things like Women in DevOps, the Leadership Labs, ex-military careers, Pride in Tech, Ethnicity Speaks. And for us, these aren't just kind of marketing initiatives. They're a real network of kind of engaged professionals where we host regular events, both kind of virtual and in person. And it's enabled us to build relationships with thousands of people over the last decade. So when a client comes to us, we don't have to start from scratch. So we're tapping into that community that we know, that we trust, that we've worked with before. And it's a really big advantage for us.
It's interesting that you mentioned like women in tech, military. It sounds like rather niche communities. Is it your focus to create like a niche communities of experts?
I think that in order for a community to be successful, it can't be for everybody. So we've tried to look at it through a number of different lenses. So obviously, ex-military careers is focused on getting kind of kind of armed forces personnel, bringing them back into civilian life and helping companies see those transferable skills. Women in DevOps is obviously focused around gender. Ethnicity Speaks is focused around race. Pride in Tech is focused around the LGBTQIA plus community. And so it's about looking at a certain segment of the market, typically one that's very underrepresented, and bringing that talent to the forefront.
To a point that freelancers are not sitting on one platform. It's so funny because when I talk to kind of competitors to other platforms and I'm like, hey, let's collaborate, let's build this world. They're like, oh, we are competitors. I'm like, are you kidding me? Do you think that freelancers will sit on your platform or on our platform? They will be everywhere. They don't really care where they will get projects. They need projects. That's like their number one goal. And like, why should we compete if we can collaborate and create more projects for freelancers? And they will be happy and everyone will be happy. And also, talking about like selecting freelancers, because when you have a community, it's amazing. You get to know people, you connect with them. And still what I see that a lot on platforms, you have too many freelancers, especially now. Before it was a little bit different. When there were freelancers, recruiters were reaching out to them and freelancers were happy to reject or like, oh no, I don't want to work on this project or I will work on this project. But now I feel like table turned and now freelancers are reaching out for projects and recruiters get too many applications and they do not know what to do with them. So I'm curious, do you vet somehow freelancers that you're working them with?
Yeah, of course. I think that quality for me is really non-negotiable. So to us, our process is pretty layered. So it starts with quite an in-depth qualification call with one of our resources. So this isn't just kind of running through the CV, but really trying to understand what you've delivered, the environment you've delivered it in, and the type of problems that you've solved. It's so important to remember that as a freelancer, a company is buying your experience. So once we've kind of established those 3 points, we'll then run kind of an internal peer review. So this is pressure testing whether they're genuinely the right fit and not just good on paper. And then after that, our account manager will have more of a commercial conversation. So having a look at kind of how this profile would land with that specific client, i.e. do the industry types match up, do the personality types match up, and whether they've operated in similar cultures or similar kind of levels of pace. And to be honest with you, realistically, just how quick they're going to add value, because as a freelancer, you do not get a long runway. You have to hit the ground running. So we go through those kind of 3 steps first. And I think more importantly, if it's someone that we have not worked with before, we'll also want to bring in kind of references or that kind of third party validation. And to me, that's a really important step because we're not just introducing a skill set. Like I say, we're putting someone forward to deliver in a live, often quite pressurized and business critical environment. So we need to look at kind of like their previous, so their track record of reliability, of communication, their delivery track record, because I want to know that if I'm presenting this person to my client, the client trusts me explicitly, that they have been properly vetted, not just, yeah, they look okay, sourced and sent.
When you are in the end of the matching process, when you chose a freelancer, company is ready, they're almost there, what can be a blocker before starting to work together?
It could be the speed of response from the candidate. I don't think sometimes people appreciate the kind of time critical environment that we work in. So before we'll ever submit a candidate to our customers, we'll always have something called like a right to represent to ensure that they have the right to work. We've got the most up-to-date profile. We have their references. We've got their holiday coming up. And sometimes if a candidate takes a day to 3 days to reply to that, unfortunately, we've already then presented a different shortlist to the customer. So speed on your guys' end is really important.
And on the company side, what can block?
I have lost count of the amount of times that I have took a job or a project brief off a customer and they've gone, it's urgent, it's so important, we'll start them as soon as possible. And then we send them 3 profiles saying, hey, these 3 guys can start on Monday. And then you don't hear back from them for 6 days. And it's a difficult one to manage because you've obviously already briefed the contractor on this really urgent role, this really urgent project that needs to kick off. You've set their expectations on that, and then the client kind of goes very quiet for a number of days. So to me, it's the communication and the speed from the client's end. I know that things can change, that's really normal, like business priorities, and recruitment isn't these guys' day-to-day job. They've got a lot of other stuff that they're trying to deliver into, but communicate that to us and let us know, and that way we can manage the expectations on our end.
It's easy when you have this slow response from freelancer side because it will be always some other freelancer. But when you have a slow response from company side, do you encourage them? Do you somehow fasten them to answer faster?
We do try. Obviously, it's part of our job, I think, as salespeople in recruitment to try and create that sense of urgency. But I think we do also have to be respectful. As I said, recruitment is not these guys' day-to-day job 9 times out of 10. Yes, we work with kind of recruitment and HR teams, but particularly when we're talking around kind of SOW, outcome-based projects like freelance solutions, we tend to be working with kind of C-suite director level who are also managing projects and managing a lot of other deadlines internally. So we will update them kind of on the freelancer situation, i.e. this person is also speaking to this company about this project. We'll ask them for timeline updates, but I'm not going to hound them for it. That would make me a very, very unpopular recruiter with my clients.
And I'm curious, like if you ask a question, why? So if a company come to you and say like, hey, it's super urgent, we need to freelancer yesterday, and then they are out for a week. Is it not that urgent? Like what's going on? Why they come and say that it's urgent and they are not responding? Like what's the why behind?
Well, that's why we always do, like I said, that kind of project qualification or job qualification with them. If they say they need someone to start immediately, we'll ask why. And then they'll say, because I have this deadline to hit, or I've got this external third party or client waiting on me for it. So we ask why, but again, to a certain extent, some things are just outside of our control and our influence. We have to work to companies' timelines.
When freelancer is on the project, are you still helping them to communicate with client, or do you leave this communication to themselves?
No, I think that would be pretty poor service from us. To me, the placement's like the start of the value that kind of we add, not the end of it. So when that contractor starts, that's where our process should really kick in. So I think it's a good area where we differentiate because we've built a really structured post-placement process. I think anyone that's worked with me will tell you that structure and process is kind of what gets me up in the morning. But we have a number of different steps that we follow to make sure both the client and the freelancer are set up for success. So normally that's kind of like a day 1 check-in. So end of the day, make sure everything's set up properly. So that's more around systems access, expectations, any early issues. We then do an end of week 1 check-in. That's more focused across kind of cultural fit, any early feedback, and essentially, is this project landing as expected? After we've done that check-in, we then move to bi-weekly. So we check in probably every couple of weeks for the next few weeks, just staying close to both sides, addressing any blockers, keeping that delivery on track. And then once we're comfortable, we'll then move to kind of formal kind of monthly project reviews. So that's where we'll look at performance, outcomes, and overall satisfaction. And they continue for the duration of the assignment. And then once we're kind of coming up to the end date, we've then kind of got 2 routes that we go down. We can either go down the kind of the extension management route. So this is where ideally we want to kind of plan ahead, get aligned on scope, negotiate on terms. I cannot stress, do not leave this until the last minute. The amount of customers we've had saying, yeah, actually 2 days before, we're going to extend this for another 6 months. And we're like, these guys are busy. They've already been approached by somebody else to go and work on their project. So either extension management is one angle, or the other angle would be kind of that offboarding. So offboarding to us isn't just a case of cool, see you later. It's gather that feedback, get testimonials, get references, and then redeploy that freelancer and that project team onto the next engagement. But to me, this whole process is the key thing is like, don't be reactive. We can't just wait for something to go wrong. You need to manage that engagement throughout, because in these high pressure, time sensitive environments, small issues do not stay small for long. So if something isn't working, whether that's performance, communication, scope, you've got to step in early and fix it. Like, we're not just checking in. I think it's important we remember we're accountable for the outcome. And to me, that's the difference between just getting someone a job and actually delivering value.
And it feels like you're also holding this kind of like project management communication, because you told that
Yes.
you are responsible for delivering value. And I think that it's exactly what sometimes blocks companies from working with freelancers. They think that they won't get what they want, but it's all about communication. I feel like that you are solving this question for them. And how do you measure the success of freelance engagement?
I think one is like the NPS, so our Net Promoter Score is quite a big part of that. I think across the market, NPS typically sits somewhere around kind of 30 to 40. Now, Trinnovo Group is consistently running around 70, which is quite a big difference. And again, that doesn't happen by accident. It comes from what we've just spoken around and how we manage our engagements. And it comes from kind of capturing that feedback early, not just at the end. So we're identifying risks, improving the experience in real time, and beyond kind of NPS, we look at our extension rate. So if a client extends a freelancer, it's the clearest signal that we're delivering real value and we're doing a good job. We look for endorsements. Would that client work with us again? And we look at freelancer experience as well. It's not just, is the client happy? It's, would that individual or would that project team go back to that client environment? Because if both sides are having a good experience, that's where you get that kind of real long-term value. So for us, the success isn't just, yeah, we filled it. It's delivering the outcome, making sure there's been a good experience on both sides, and just building those relationships that last beyond that one engagement, and just trying not to be transactional. I always use this stat 'cause it's my favorite one, but there are 58,000 recruitment companies in the UK. Like, you have to differentiate, you have to provide a good service, otherwise you are just going to blend in and become white noise.
That's how it works. I feel like not just for a company, but also for professionals. There are like thousands and millions of professionals, and you are not, yeah, especially a freelancer, if you are not differentiating, who will ever care about you? Especially if you are not present on some social media like LinkedIn or whatever, who will even know
Yeah.
that you exist? So it's always like a two-side coin. And if we are talking about speed, like you were talking a lot about
Yeah.
how fast freelancers are and how it's important for companies to be agile and all the things. And can you share some examples where freelancers helped companies to deliver faster or maybe even enter new markets?
Yes, let me have a think. There's actually one that we've just delivered quite recently for a global pharmaceutical business. We are under NDA, so I don't think I can say that name, sorry. But they came to us with quite a complex challenge. It was an interesting one around the mixture of artificial intelligence, human rights, and regulatory compliance in light of like the new legislation coming up, like the EU AI Act. So what they needed our support on was that right to health due diligence and stakeholder mapping, integrating human rights into their AI risk management framework, and advancing what they called their kind of like integrated assurance, but essentially breaking down silos across different risk areas like labour rights and anti-bribery. Now, the challenge for this customer, it wasn't just capacity. Like, what we've just spoken about is really niche and really specialist kind of expertise, and they're not roles that they were able to hire for permanently. So what we did is we delivered kind of the entire project for them through a statement of work model. We pulled together a really specialized project team. And this project team were global. We had people across the UK, Ireland, America, and Switzerland. And that's again what that kind of global network will do for you. And this global team will focus on really specific deliverables like conducting detailed research, producing recommendations on right to health obligations, assessing and strengthening the AI risk frameworks, designing like the integrated approach. And it worked so well in the end. I think the key thing for us was that it was all delivered kind of on time, under budget, as well, which I was quite happy with, but which is always really important in these environments. But I think more importantly, it gave this customer immediate access to expertise that they just didn't have internally, and allowed them to move really quickly in response to this change. So I think that's a really good example of where kind of freelancers can add value. It's not just about filling a role. We brought the expertise, we delivered the outcome on time, and we allowed them to move faster than they otherwise would have done.
And it also sounds like you created this freelance team, which is
Yes.
like even harder than hiring just one freelancer, because one freelancer, you just take them, you just add them, and then you have to manage the whole team of independent talent. I feel like it's much harder. And I'm curious, when you are working on such a scale, what is the hardest part of creating the team of freelancers?
Finding the freelancers for us, I don't want to sound too cocky here, but finding the freelancers for us sometimes it isn't the biggest of challenge, because we've been around for 15 years as a group, working within the same markets for those 15 years. We've got a really strong pool of candidates that we've been able to tap into through the community. So it's not finding the people, it's finding the people that will work well together. We know that people are very individualists sometimes, is one way to put it. So finding that blend of personalities from different countries and very different cultures, finding those people that will work well together and harmonize and deliver an outcome, that's the tricky bit. So I think that's where companies should be engaging kind of specialist expertise such as ourselves.
We've been saying a lot of praise for freelancers and independent talent, and it's kind of like true. Yeah, sorry, but it's true. And what are companies missing if they don't adapt their processes on working with flexible talent?
I just think quite simply, they're just going to fall behind. Like I keep banging on about this, like this pace of change means that businesses are now competing on like the speed of execution, not just the actual strategy. And if your only way of bringing talent in is through kind of traditional permanent hiring, you're just going to be too slow. And it shows up in very real ways around kind of projects being missed, opportunities being missed, competitors getting there first, which, like I say, is probably the most frustrating bit. And I think the second risk is probably around that kind of access to talent. You mentioned earlier, the best freelancers are selective, and they don't engage with companies that have really poor onboarding, that have slow processes, or more importantly, an unclear scope. So the business risk there is that you're not just slowing things down, but you're losing access to that talent kind of pool altogether. And I think that gap will just compound and compound over time. So if you're not augmenting your teams properly with that flexible talent as well, that pressure's going to get absorbed internally. And that to me is like that big third risk. If you're absorbing all of that pressure on your internal teams, it's going to end up in burnout, in reduced quality of work, and ultimately attrition, which is far more expensive than just bringing in the right kind of external expertise in the first place. And that's probably the last bit, is probably that cost point, which to me is the most misunderstood. A lot of businesses go, whoa, contractors, freelancers, it's too expensive for me. But what they don't think of is that the delays cost more, that poor delivery costs more. And realistically as well, hiring that wrong permanent person costs more. So the savings that you're seeing on paper, just the permanent hire versus that day rate of that contractor, it's just being pushed into different parts of the business.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes companies don't want to calculate, and as you've said, they see just this rate, and they compare it, and okay, whatever, it's too expensive. But then, as you've said, there are so many extra moments they need to count in. But it's up to them. It's their own problem. And
we can only advise.
Yeah, we can tell, hey, this is happening. Like, if you don't want to fall behind, just check it out. If not, whatever, we told you. And
we'll be here when you change your mind.
Wiki, I wish to have the sky's limit. I have so many companies, so many questions to ask you more, but time is the limit. So, what advice would you give to companies just starting to use freelancers and to freelancers entering the market?
For companies, I would say don't just treat the contractors, what we spoke about at the beginning, around that kind of old school reactive way, or almost like a bit of a shortcut. Like, yes, they can fill a gap, but if you use them really well, they can be a competitive advantage. But let's face it, that is going to require a little bit of thought. So you need to be really clear on the outcome, not just of the role, but what kind of success looks like and what you actually need delivered. Because not just freelancers, people work best when they're aligned to a clear objective. Secondly, get that process right. Things like that fast, efficient hiring process. Nobody needs a 3-4 stage interview process to hire a freelancer. A clear onboarding, because again, these freelancers will not wait around and they won't engage in something that's messy. And then lastly, once they're actually in, treat them well, like include them, communicate with them, give them context. And the best freelancers will add far more value if they understand the bigger picture and not just the task in front of them. So get those things right, move faster, get better outcomes, and you're going to build this network of people that you can rely on long term. So that's what I would say for contractors. I think for a freelancer entering the market, try positioning yourself not just on your skill set, but on the outcomes that you can actually deliver. There's a lot of people in the market who say on their CV they can do similar things. So you need to separate yourself into, these are the problems I've solved, and this is the impact I've delivered. So be really clear on that value. And aside from kind of demonstrating those outcomes, I'd build your reputation as well. I think a lot of freelance work comes through offline networks and referrals. So I think this matters just as much as kind of like I said, that technical ability is delivering consistently, communicating well, leaving a strong impression, attending conferences, attending meetups, and building kind of that personal brand.
By the way, to the conference, we're hosting Freelance Unlocked conference in Berlin in June 11-12. So freelancers, go.
Nice, good
go
segue
listen.
for you there.
Exactly. And to keep the conversation going, name 2 people I should reach out to talk about the independent workforce.
Oh, good question. I would recommend 2 people, probably 2 people that I've worked with previously. One is a gentleman called Mike Lee. Mike Lee was my director at a previous business I worked with, and he was a gentleman that I learned so much from, in not just kind of how to work, but in how to work with people. So I'd say Mike would be a very, very good first one. And secondly, it's actually a gentleman that I worked with probably about 15 years ago, a guy called Nathan Laidlaw. When I was a trainee or an intern working in my very first recruitment company, this was a guy that I saw do contract really well. So if you're looking for a role, if you're looking for a little bit of advice, speak to Nathan as well.
Last but not least, what is one question that I should have asked you about the freelance market, but didn't?
I don't know. You put me on the spot there.
That's just in case, just in case you're like, oh my God, Yurii didn't ask me this question. How could he? So we'll definitely continue the conversation. You already shared so many nuggets of wisdom, and I really love how you advocate for independent talent, because if you go outside in the market, there are not that many people, even some of the people who are working with this independent talent, they are still advocating just for full-time and thinking about freelancers just an add-on. Something that like, oh, okay, whatever, you want contractor? Yeah, we have some. But I clearly see that you are passionate about it. And thank you so much, first of all, for all this great experience, all those examples that you shared with me today, and also for just moving this market forward. Thank you very much, Viki.
No worries. Thank you, Yurii. Cheers.
And see you on the freelance market. And for listeners, thank you for joining us on this episode of the Independent Workforce. I hope you've taken one step closer to working smarter with freelance talent. If you enjoyed this conversation, subscribe to learn even more and share it with your colleague. And remember, the future of work is now.